Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to show you how to easily use Adobe Lightroom to take a photo from looking like this to this, and it all starts right now. Alright guys, let's go ahead and get started. The first thing you're going to want to do is open the Lightroom app. If you don't already have it, the best way to get it is just to Google Adobe Lightroom Classic. You're going to want the Adobe Classic version rather than the CC for this particular tutorial. And I'll put a link down in the description below. But in case that link ever breaks, just go ahead and Google Adobe Lightroom Classic. For the purpose of this tutorial, I'm going to assume that you guys know the basic functionality of Lightroom and how to navigate the app. So go on up to the Develop panel, which can be found up top. And then once you have that open, it's pretty standard. Over on the left, you have the photo that you're editing. You have your collections. You have all of the different presets that you can use, and a few other things. And over on the right are where all the controls are, which is where we're going to be spending most of the time today in the tutorial. So we're going to run through all of these sliders, and I know it can be a little intimidating when you first look at it, but I promise you it's really not that tough. And in order to get started, we're going to start with the first section, and then we'll work our way down through. And important to note, so this image was taken on a Sony DSLR, and it was shot in RAW. If you guys don't know what that is, there's a ton of information you can find online between the difference of a RAW photo versus a JPEG or other format. But essentially, when you shoot in RAW, it allows you to edit the image a lot better and bring out the true colors than if you were to shoot in JPEG. So that's why it looks so dull to start with. That being said, if you're using a JPEG or some other format, this tutorial should still work. You may just not have as much flexibility. All right, section 1 are the basic editing sliders, and this is going to be where we actually start the edit. It can be found here on the right. And we're going to start with the temperature sliders. So because this was shot in the desert, I'm actually going to increase the warmth a little bit just to bring out some of those desert colors. You can either slide the slider to make the adjustment, or alternatively, you can actually type in the value on the right if you happen to know where you want to land. It's a little bit trickier to do it this way, and it's definitely for more of the pro user. For most of you guys, just using the slider is going to be your best bet. Coming down to the tint, I'm going to adjust this a little bit as well to bring out some of the greens in the background and the bushes. And I always start with these two sliders, just as a base level beginning starting point. Next are exposure and contrast. Exposure I'm going to bump up just slightly. It's already pretty well exposed, although she is backlit, so we're going to have to fix that later on. Next is the contrast slider, and again, this is going to be pretty minimal just because she is backlit, but you might want to add more contrast to your particular photo. We'll leave it at right about there. Okay, next are highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. I'm going to bring the highlights down a little bit since she is backlit. Typically, this is not the direction I go. And then shadows we're going to need to play with as well since it's a darker image. You can see how much of an adjustment it's already making. And then whites and blacks we'll need to touch as well. And you can see just how playing with the lighting can already have such a drastic effect on the image. I usually always go negative on blacks just to really bring those out. Texture, clarity, and dehaze you got to be really careful with, or else it'll pixelate the image. It'll also kind of make it look a little bit more grainy, and personally I only use these sparingly, with clarity being the one that I use the most. And then vibrance and saturation, I usually actually reduce saturation while increasing vibrance. So we'll bump the vibrance up a little bit, and then we'll bring the saturation down. And we're actually going to add color back later on using different sliders, which you guys will see. Okay, on to the next section, which is tone curve. This is a really powerful tool, and it's one that a lot of different editing softwares have, but I think that Lightroom actually does it the best. And there's so many different things you can do with this tool and how you can manipulate the line. And if you don't exactly know how to use it, there are a ton of great tutorials online showing you how to do that. I may even make one in the future, so I'll link it up above if that comes out. But for today's purposes, we're gonna use the sliders rather than doing a custom line. And I will show you how to do that. So for today's edits, let's use the sliders, and we're gonna start with the darks. And we're gonna bring them up a little bit. I know we went the opposite direction up above, but you'll see why in a second. Shadows, we also went the opposite direction up above. But again, you can see how much of a difference this is making already. And then lights and highlights we're gonna leave for now. which are the HSL sliders. Those stand for hue, saturation, and luminance. And I'm gonna walk you through each section because these can be incredibly powerful when you're manipulating your photo. And either editing the colors to be what you want them to be, or adding back colors that might have been lost due to shooting in RAW, or changing the luminance and saturation so certain areas of the photo stand out better than others. All that can be done here. And a really easy way to learn how to use these if you don't necessarily know how to use each individual slider is to actually grab this little selection tool right here. And what you do is you click on an area of the image that you want to adjust and you just drag up or down, and it'll move the sliders that correspond to those colors, as you can see on the right. So if you wanted to make the oranges a different color in her suit, or if you wanted to, change the color of the wood or the trees, you could do so just by clicking and dragging. But for the purpose of today's tutorial, I'm just gonna slide these because I've had enough experience now to kind of know what to adjust. But if you're just starting out, using the tool I just showed you is a great way to learn. So starting with the red, we're gonna adjust these a little bit, not too much. But again, we're playing in the hue section, and then we'll come on down to saturation and luminance next. Orange, I'm gonna adjust just slightly. Again, that's one of the prominent colors in the photo. Same with the yellows. You can see the before and after by just clicking the backslash key. Okay, keep making our way through. We'll do aqua and green. Again, I'm just kind of eyeballing this to go off of the colors in real life found in the desert. These are all going to be adjusted once again down in the section at the very end, which we'll come to shortly. Then let's adjust the magenta a little bit as well. Okay, next is saturation. And again, this is an incredibly powerful area, especially when you're playing with skin tones. Here you can make somebody who maybe isn't tan look tan. You can adjust the skin tones to be more or less saturated. Maybe it looks a little too orange, so you can bring some of that down. It's incredibly powerful what you can do with just the HSL sliders. So we'll bring the orange down just slightly. Yellows need to be manipulated as well, just a little bit. And again, guys, we're just going off of eyeballing here. So, feel free to play with this on your end and whatever photo it is that you're using to edit. There's a lot of things that you can do here. The greens I'm going to desaturate because the bushes seem to be a little bit distracting right now with how bright they are. Bring down the aqua a little bit. And I know it looks like we're removing pretty much all the color from the image, and I know that it may be the opposite of what you think should be happening here. I promise you all of this is going to be added back as we go through the rest of this and at the end when we do our final tweaks. So it may look like we're removing a lot, but basically what we're doing is building the base layer to do the final tweaks and adjustments at the very end. And a reminder that you can use just the little tool on the left and click and drag to make adjustments in a particular area. So last, let's come on down to luminance, and I'm going to adjust some of these because there are some brighter colors in the photo that need to be fixed. When you guys see the different Instagram looks online, they have a lot of blue or orange, or the colors look a little bit different than you'd see in real life. A lot of that is done by manipulating the HSL sliders and most specifically the hue sliders that we started with. Okay, next section is called split toning, and this is a really cool section because it allows you to play with the highlights and the shadows of the image. So for this particular shot, we shot it out in Palm Springs. It needs to be a warmer image, and right now it looks a little cool. And I'm gonna fix that using this section. So I'm gonna start by adjusting the hue slider. And if you're new to Lightroom, I would actually suggest cranking the saturation first and then adjusting the hue to see how it affects the image. I personally know that this needs to be a warmer image, so I'm sliding the hue into the warms, and then I'm gonna bring the saturation in to warm the image as you just saw. For shadows, I really don't need to do too much here. I might adjust them slightly, but again, I'm probably gonna only focus on highlights because I want to make this image have more of a warmer, desert feel to it, given that we shot it, you know, in late summer in Palm Springs. And here's the balance slider showing you guys just how powerful it is and easy for you to switch between the two. This looks pretty good, you know, right down in here. It still brings out some warmth, but it's not super intense. Okay, moving on to the next section, which is sharpening and noise reduction. This section you need to be really, really, really careful of. And it's the only section where a slider, if you look at the sharpening slider, actually has red in the slider showing you if you've gone too far. And the reason is if you over sharpen or if you do too much noise reduction, it's gonna look really weird. If you add too much sharpening, it's gonna get really pixelated, really grainy, and it's just gonna look awful. And on the flip side, if you add too much noise reduction, it's not gonna be grainy or look awful. What's gonna happen is it's gonna be super smooth. It's gonna be almost like you added a Gaussian blur. So you gotta be really careful and only adjust these sliders sparingly. Section is called lens corrections, and this is a really fun area, especially if you're shooting with like a GoPro or something with maybe a fisheye lens that you need to fix. This is where you do that, and you do it by using this slider right here, and I'll show you, just how easy it is to manipulate the image. And you can click constrain crop, which will crop it for you as you make the adjustments. But this photo already looks pretty good, so there's really not much here that we need to do. So let's move on to the next section. Okay, and the last section that we're gonna cover before we go back through and make our final tweaks is the calibration section. And this is an insanely powerful tool within Lightroom. And I know I've said that about a lot of the different areas, but this one is crazy what you can do. I mean, you can manipulate the colors and really change everything within a moment's notice if you're not careful. But on the same time, it allows you to change so much and really calibrate the image to what you want. And remember earlier how I said I was taking out a lot of the color and it's gonna come back right now? This is the section we're gonna do that in. We're gonna make this photo really go from, what it looks like right now to what I showed you in the beginning as the final. And although there are a few remaining tweaks that we're gonna do right at the end of this, a lot of it's gonna be done right now. So let's dive into this section and I'll walk you through it. So you don't really wanna touch tint too much. I hardly ever actually play with that one. Red, green, and blue primaries are the main areas of focus for this. And if you don't really know why, if you've ever looked really close at a computer screen, the pixels are actually made up of little tiny red, green, and blue cells. And the same thing with your camera. Those are the primary colors that your camera picks up. So these sliders are what's actually adjusting those pixels and making the colors change within the data itself. And that's why this section is so powerful. So starting with the red slider, just because it's on top here, you can see what it can do. And a lot of this is gonna be really pronounced when we move down to the blue primary slider. I'm just gonna tweak the red and the greens a little bit. And again, for your own image, you're gonna wanna play with the saturation levels for each of these. The blue in particular, I find, especially with skin tones and kind of, that Instagram look is the one that you're gonna wanna focus on. And the saturation within the blue slider as well, just be careful that you don't overdo it. It's gonna make skin tones in particular look kind of orange. All right, so now we're really getting down to that, edited look that is so popular on Instagram. And a lot of that's being done just with the blue primary slider. You can see how it's really affected the oranges and really brought down the greens in the background. And then we're gonna adjust the saturation as well. And again, as you'll notice, I actually went down in saturation on all of these. Some images I do go up, but for a lot of these I removed the saturation because we're gonna throw it in at the very end. But do play around with it, especially in this section, and just kind of tinker with it and see what works best for the image that you're working with and kind of the look that you're going for. But this is an incredibly powerful resource. Okay, so now that we've run through all the sections, we're gonna do some final tweaks back in the basic panel. And you can see the before and after. Obviously it looks a lot better than what we started with, but there are still some final tweaks that I wanna do to this, especially with the saturation. I think it needs to be bumped up just a little bit. But you can see the wood in the background and everything else looks really good. So let's bring the brightness out just a little bit more. Not too much. Bump the contrast a little bit as well. We're gonna add some clarity now that we've already gone through everything. And then we're gonna add some vibrance and bump the saturation just a little bit. Again, I hardly ever touch the saturation slider. I find the vibrance one to be much better to use. I actually usually go negative with the saturation. In this particular case, we're going up just 6 notches, but you know, for the most part, don't touch saturation too much. If anything, go negative. And then one more area I want to play with just one last time is the tone curve. So we're gonna come back in and adjust the darks and the shadows just a little bit more. And you can see how much depth this is adding to the image and really toning down those blacks just to make it really crisp. And I'm really liking how it's looking, you know, right now. We'll bring out the highlights just a little bit more as well. And if you wanted to make any more edits, again, you can go all back through these sections and tweak everything. If you wanted to go to the HSL sliders again, or if you wanted to go all the way down to the bottom and do, you know, more corrections down there, it's entirely up to you. A great thing to do is kind of run through everything all once and then go back through and do some final tweaks. But this is looking pretty good to where I want to be. The basic panel up top is going to be your friend. That's going to be where you want to start and probably where you want to end with your edits, where you filtered everything and done all the tweaks within the individual sections. So here's the before and after. And as you can see, it's a huge difference. I think it looks really good compared to what we started with. And I think, you know, this is definitely ready to pop into Instagram. If you haven't already seen it, I did my first video on Instagram editing controls that you can actually do within the app itself. You don't have to download anything separate. So what I normally do is actually make the edits in Lightroom. About 90% of the edits are done in Lightroom. The last 10% is done in Instagram with the native controls. That way it looks really good on Instagram because you're using their controls to finalize the image. So I'm gonna link that up above. Take a look if you haven't already. Couple more tips for you guys. If you like this edit and you have an entire series that you've shot, you know, maybe you don't want to have to edit for every single photo, you can actually copy it in between photos by going to develop settings. You right click on the photo, go to develop settings, and then copy settings. And then when you go to the new photo or highlight a series of photos, you can go to paste settings and it'll move over everything that we just did. You can also save it as a preset by going up to develop and save new preset. And that way you have it for future use. But again, presets are only a base. You're still gonna have to probably do adjustments on top of that because every time you shoot, you know, the lighting, the background, the model, everything is completely different, and therefore it's gonna require a few tweaks. And that's the end of the tutorial. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it and learned something new. I'd really appreciate it if you consider subscribing and throwing a like on the video. As you know, this is the second video of the entire channel and I'm really trying to grow. Really appreciate everybody's support so far. If you have any other, you know, tutorials or things that you guys want to learn about, be sure to comment in the section below. And again, most of the links that were mentioned throughout this video can be found in the description. Hope you guys enjoyed and see you next time.